The main hall of the Zhang family mansion breathed a kind of cold that did not come from air or season. It came from marble, polished until it gleamed like ice, from walls paneled in wood that smelled faintly of lacquered wealth, and from portraits of ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to peer down with eternal judgment. Their faces, stern and aloof, lined the walls like a silent jury. And in the middle of that grand hall, its ceiling so high it swallowed sound, stood a girl. A girl in plain clothes, garments carefully laundered, yet far too simple against the silks and jewels worn by the others in the room. She was 9, though hardship had carved into her a maturity that made her seem older. Her name was Tanya. For 72 hours she had been locked away, starved of food and water, treated less like flesh and blood and more like an inconvenience. Today she stood before her family not as a daughter reclaimed, but as a ledger entry to be bartered. Her fists, small and clenched, trembled at her sides. She tried not to meet the eyes of the portraits, those painted specters who might whisper, "She does not belong here." Instead, she focused on the living figures before her, the ones who held her fate. Her biological mother sat rigidly, her painted lips pressed tight, her eyes refusing to meet her daughter's gaze. A woman of brittle vanity, like porcelain ready to crack. Her father, Chandra, the family's second son, watched her with a curl of impatience at the corner of his mouth. His voice, sharp and transactional, cut through the stillness as he spoke to the others. "She will be married to the Zhao boy," he declared, his tone as though announcing the sale of livestock. "It is the most logical arrangement. The third son is foolish, yes, but his family brings us access to 2 major projects. This is the maximum utilization of her existence." Maximum utilization. The words lodged into her chest like shards of glass. Her gaze shifted then to the figure at the head of the room, the patriarch, her grandfather, Yoga. His face was carved of stone, his eyes deep pools of unreadable judgment. He had said nothing yet, only watched. Tanya knew at once. The others were shadows cast by his fire, puppets. If she wanted freedom, if she wanted a life beyond the iron bars of her father's schemes, it would not be through pleading with her mother or arguing with Chandra. The key, the lock, the gatekeeper, all of it was him. A faint memory rose unbidden, the village where she had grown up, forgotten by this family. Nights spent in a leaking shack, the sound of rain dripping like a relentless clock above her bed. A single candle stub burning low as she hunched over a tattered book, tracing words until they imprinted themselves into her mind. She had been both student and teacher, forging etiquette from guesswork, polishing her speech until her tongue could cut like silk. Those nights had shaped her, and it was with the steel forged there that she now lifted her chin. Her voice, clear and steady, rang through the hall like a blade striking against stone. "I object." The words sliced the air. Chandra turned, his sneer widening as his gaze raked over her plain attire, her clenched fists. "You object?" he spat, as though the word itself was ridiculous in her mouth. "On what grounds? You are a Zhang. You will do your duty." Her fists shook, but not with fear. Her voice rose trembling with a righteous fury that made her seem taller than her small frame allowed. "You locked me in my room, without food, without water," she accused, her words like arrows loosed from a bow. "And now you speak of throwing me into more suffering? Even tigers do not eat their own cubs. Tell me, are you even human?" The insult landed like thunder. The room stirred. Servants shifted uneasily in the corners. And in that stillness, a flicker, small but undeniable, lit in the eyes of her grandfather, Yoga. He had seen her now, not just the defiant words, but the steel in her posture, the deliberate control of her breath. Her anger was sharp, yes, but it was not wild. It was honed. He thought of his youth, of the night he himself had defied his father, risking everything to seize the family business and forge it into an empire. This girl carried that same fire, that same refusal to be bent. For the first time in years, Yoga felt something stir inside him, a slow, grudging respect. Tanya sensed the shift. Her instincts, honed by years of watching and surviving, screamed that this was her moment. She could not falter. She stepped forward and executed a bow so precise it silenced even the whispers in the corners. Her voice rang out, not trembling now, but resonant with conviction. "A child owes duty only when a father is loving. Since my father is not loving, I beg you, grandfather, to let me choose a new one." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the echo of her words fading into the high ceiling. Then Khandra exploded, his rage a whip crack. "Insolence! Madness! You dare stand here in front of our ancestors and speak such poison? I will have you committed to a hospital this very night." But before his words could gather strength, another voice shattered the air. "You are the one who needs his head examined," Yoga's voice boomed, thunder rolling through the hall. Servants flinched, even the portrait seemed to lean away from its force. He turned his fury on his second son. "She is your flesh and blood, lost for years, and this is how you welcome her? By locking her away, by selling her like cattle. You are unfit to be her father, unfit to be anything but a disgrace." His judgment fell like an axe. Then his gaze turned, softened, and rested on Tanya. "Well, child," he asked, his voice calmer now, tinged with something rarer, curiosity. "So, if not him, then who will you choose?" The room held its breath. Every cousin, uncle, and servant strained forward to hear. Tanya's eyes scanned the hall, past the glittering women, past the calculating men. Then she saw him, slouched in a chair apart from the others, his shirt half unbuttoned, his expression half lost to a haze of apathy. Johann, the eldest son. Her mind raced. Khandra was cruel, her mother was weak, the others were vipers, each more venomous than the last. But this one, there was pain in his eyes, but no malice. A man broken, yes, but not evil. I can mold him. I can save him. And in saving him, he will save me. Her voice, steady as a drumbeat, broke the silence. "I want him," she said, pointing directly at Johann. "I want him to be my father." Khandra's laughter erupted, cruel and braying. "Her choice proves her madness. Of all men she chooses him, the drunkard, the fool. Be careful, girl, or he'll feed you to his crocodiles when he's drunk." The hall erupted in uneasy laughter, mocking and cruel. But Johann, who had sat in a haze of detachment until now, stirred. Slowly, as though waking from a long sleep, he straightened. His gaze, once dull, fixed on the defiant girl pointing at him. And in that instant, something unfamiliar, something long buried, rose in his chest. A flicker of protectiveness. He stood, his movements surprisingly steady. His voice, when it came, was warm, rough at the edges, but sincere. "Come here, daughter," he said, opening his arms. "I may not be reliable, but I would never sell you to a fool. I would never lock you away. Come home with me, and we will enjoy life."
Gasps rippled across the hall. And so, before the stunned eyes of the Zhang clan, the family's greatest disappointment adopted its most defiant hope. The villa of Johann Zhang was a palace of excess, and yet to Tanya's eyes it felt strangely hollow. The moment they entered, her new father had raised his voice with the careless exuberance of a man who believed money was the answer to all wounds. "Bibilina!" Johann bellowed, his words echoing through the marble hall lined with half-empty liquor bottles and forgotten luxury. "Go, buy my daughter 1,000 new outfits. Redecorate the West Suite into a princess's chamber. Gold curtains, velvet rugs, chandeliers brighter than the sun. Spare no expense." His eyes, which moments ago had been dull with disillusionment, now shone with childlike eagerness. He dropped to one knee before her, his voice softening. "You are my daughter now," he said with uncharacteristic gravity. "Do anything you wish. If you poke a hole in the sky, I will patch it for you." For the first time in years, Johann's words carried no drunken slur, no mocking bravado. They carried a dangerous thing, sincerity. And Tanya, standing small yet proud in the cavernous room, made her vow in silence. "They all laugh at this man, but I will lift him. I will sharpen him into a blade, and with him he will not only stand, he will rise." But to raise a fallen man was not easy. Johann's enjoying life was poison disguised as freedom. Nights of heavy whiskey where the amber liquid drowned every thought. Afternoons of reckless speed on glittering sports cars that roared like demons across Beijing streets. Hours of mahjong, the sharp clack of tiles striking one another in smoky rooms filled with empty laughter. And always, always, that glass tank in the corner, the gleaming eyes of his pet crocodile staring with primal hunger. "Little sweetie," he called it, his most loyal companion. Beneath the noise, however, was a silence far heavier than any party. In the quiet corners of his nights, when neon lights blurred against car windows and laughter receded into a ringing void, the ghost returned. The scandal. 9 years ago, his name had been dragged through mud so deep it had never washed away. He could still hear the reporters shouting, cameras flashing like gunfire, strangers spitting his name like poison. He could still see his father's face carved with disappointment, the back of his hand striking across his cheek. And worst of all, he could still feel the betrayal, his own brother's shadow behind it all. Every bottle he emptied, every reckless gamble, every late-night stumble back to this hollow villa, it was all his answer to that wound. And Tanya, his newly adopted daughter, walked right into this storm of emptiness. She knew words would never be enough. He had been scolded, mocked, and pitied all his life, and none of it changed him. She had to reach the heart he had buried beneath ash and alcohol. So she set her stage with silence. One afternoon, she sat at the wide window of his villa, sunlight spilling over her small frame. Her back was straight, her hands still, but her face, oh, her face was rivers of sorrow. Tears ran unchecked down her cheeks, glistening in the light, silent as falling rain. Johann stumbled into the room, humming some half-forgotten tune, and froze. The sight stabbed through him like a blade. "Tanya?" His voice cracked, unsteady. What is it? Who hurt you?" She turned, eyes wide and brimming, with her voice breaking into a whisper that seemed to shake the walls. "I know, Father. I know your cars, your bars, your mahjong, they are all more fun than me. And your crocodile, you call him little sweetie. Tell me, am I not as cute as him?" The words shattered him. For a moment, Johann could not breathe. The room spun, and all the nights of laughter, speed, and drink collapsed into ash. He saw himself as she must have seen him, a hollow man who could not love, who could not protect, who had let his own daughter feel less cherished than a beast in a tank. A flood of guilt, sharp and merciless, roared through him. Beneath it, something even more dangerous stirred, a desperate need to change. The transformation was not gentle. It was ruthless. "Bibilina," Johann thundered, his voice shaking the chandeliers. "Sell all my cars, every last one. I don't care if collectors beg me to keep them. They are gone." The housekeeper gasped. Tanya blinked. "Sell the bar, empty it, close it, erase its name from the streets." His eyes burned, fierce with an anger she had never seen. "Throw out the mahjong set, smash it to pieces if you must." And then, his voice dropped, cold and final. "Kill the crocodile, stew it for my daughter to eat." The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. The housekeeper paled. Tanya's heart lurched, half with shock, half with a secret, guilty satisfaction. Her plan had worked too well. That evening, the villa filled with the scent of spiced broth and tender meat. Johann sat across from Tanya at the long dining table, his hands trembling as he placed the bowl before her. "There," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "The beast is gone. My daughter will never compete with shadows again." Tanya looked at him, not at the stew, but at the man before her. His eyes were clear, his face set with a new, brutal resolve. And in that moment, as the echoes of her plan resounded in the hollow spaces of the villa, she realized she had not just tamed a playboy. She had awakened something far more dangerous and far more powerful. A father who would burn the world for his daughter.
The summons came at dawn. A lacquered envelope sealed with the Jiang crest, hand-delivered by one of Grandfather Yoga's most trusted aides. The words inside were simple, yet they carried the weight of dynasties. Present yourself at the patriarch's birthday banquet. Johann must arrive looking fit to stand among men, not corpses. Tanya folded the letter carefully, her mind racing. This was not a casual invitation. It was a test. If Johann stumbled, they would both be cast aside. But if he shone, the world would see what she already knew, that her father, her chosen father, was not the failure everyone believed. The week that followed was relentless. In Johann's villa, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses was replaced by the scrape of shoes on marble as Tanya drilled him in posture. Back straight, shoulders steady, she commanded, circling him like a hawk. No slouching. Every step is a declaration. You are not drifting into a bar. You are entering a battlefield. Johann groaned, tugging at the stiff collar of the suit she had forced him to wear. Battlefield, banquet, same thing. Too many people trying to stab you. Exactly, Tanya replied, her tone sharpened with conviction. Only here, the knives are hidden behind silk sleeves. She made him practice rising from a chair, slow, deliberate, like a king rising to issue judgment. She corrected the way he lifted a wine glass, the way he nodded when spoken to, the way his gaze should linger just long enough to command respect without tipping into arrogance. At night, she laid out suits before him, silks and wools tailored sharp as blades. Johann, who once lived in flowered shirts and sunglasses at midnight, grumbled at every choice. Yet beneath the complaints, something inside him stirred. In the mirror, he began to see a man he had not seen in years. A man his enemies had buried, but not killed. The night of the banquet arrived. The Jiang mansion blazed with light, chandeliers spilling golden fire across marble floors. Outside, cars lined the drive like a parade of steel beasts. Inside, the elite of Beijing buzzed like wasps, wine glasses clinking, jewels glittering, voices dripping with gossip. Have you heard? One guest whispered, his breath thick with brandy. They say Johann is coming tonight. A ripple of cruel laughter followed. Johann, the drunkard. Perhaps he'll wear his crocodile as a scarf, or drive his car through the front gate again. The laughter grew, swelling like a tide of mockery. And then, silence. The grand doors swung open. Johann stepped in. He moved slowly, deliberately, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat. Gone was the disheveled playboy with bleary eyes and slouching shoulders. Tonight he wore a tailored suit of midnight black, the cut precise, the lines crisp. His face, clean-shaven, held no drunken blur, only a quiet, steady confidence. His gaze swept the room, and wherever it landed, whispers died in throats. Beside him walked Tanya, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her presence both anchor and crown. Together, they looked less like a disgraced uncle and his stray ward, and more like a prince returning from exile with his heir by his side. Grandfather Yoga, seated at the head of the banquet, watched the transformation with a gleam in his eye. Slowly, deliberately, he stood, his cane striking once against the marble. "Impressive," he said, his voice carrying above the hush. "Very impressive." Then, before the entire assembly, he lifted a deed bound in red silk. The young villa, worth 20 trillion rupiah. Tonight, it belongs to Tanya. Gasps rippled through the hall. A gift of that magnitude was no token. It was recognition. It was power. The banquet continued, but a deeper test was yet to come. The gift-giving ceremony. Yuna, Kondra's daughter, approached first. She bowed low, her silk gown whispering across the floor. "Grandfather," she said sweetly, "I offer you the song you love most, Holy Clouds and Clear Sound." The hall hushed as she sat at the guzheng. Her fingers danced with practiced grace, the notes precise, the melody flawless. When the final chord faded, polite applause followed. Then Tanya stepped forward, calm, composed. She said, "My gift is also that song, but I will play it complete." A scoff rolled through the audience. "Impossible," someone muttered. "That score is lost." "A village girl dares to boast," another sneered. Tanya ignored them. She lowered herself before the guzheng, her fingers hovering over the strings. For one heartbeat, the silence was heavy as stone. Then she began to play. The sound was unlike anything the hall had heard before. Not merely music, but a voice from another age. Each note shimmered like moonlight spilled into water, rising and falling in waves that pulled at the soul. The melody spoke of forgotten dynasties, of ancient grief and timeless hope. It was tender as a mother's lullaby, fierce as a warrior's cry. The air itself seemed to tremble. A glass of wine, untouched on the table, rippled as guests gasped as the liquid danced in perfect harmony with the music, shimmering in rhythm as if the melody itself commanded the world to respond. A legend, once dismissed as myth, unfolded before their eyes. Tears slipped down the patriarch's cheeks. For him, it was not merely a performance. It was memory. It was his youth, when he too had been bold, when love and fire had not yet withered into stone. When the final note faded, silence held the room captive for a long, aching moment. Then Yoga rose to his feet, his cane trembling in his grasp. "The best gift I have ever received," he declared, his voice breaking with emotion. And then came the thunderbolt. "For this, I grant Tanya 10% of the Jiang Group shares." The hall erupted. Gasps, whispers, shouts. 10%. Combined with Johan's existing shares, they now held 20, a fifth of the empire, enough to shift the balance of power. Kandra's face drained of blood, his fists clenched until the knuckles whitened. In the corner of the hall, he slipped into the shadows, his voice a hiss of venom into a waiting phone. "The plan is on," he snarled. "Do it now." And thus, beneath the glittering chandeliers, as wine still rippled from Tanya's divine performance, a darker storm began to gather.
The celebration should have ended in triumph. Laughter, applause, and the sweet aftertaste of victory still clung to the air like incense. But fate does not always allow joy to linger. It began with a sound, sharp, piercing, out of place, a woman's cry. Gasps rippled through the glittering banquet hall as heads turned. The grand doors burst open. A woman stumbled in, her clothes disheveled, her face streaked with tears. She clutched her swollen belly as if cradling it from the world's cruelty. Her eyes, red with sleepless nights, locked onto Johan. "You," her voice cracked, trembling like glass about to shatter. "You are the father of my child." The hall erupted into chaos. Crystal glasses toppled, striking the marble floor with sharp cracks. The orchestra faltered into silence. Murmurs became a storm of scandalous whispers. Again? History repeats itself. Disgraceful. Johan stood frozen, every muscle stiff as if lightning had struck him. He stared at the woman as though seeing a ghost dredged up from the filth of his past. The patriarch, Yoga, slammed his cane against the floor. His voice, cold and thunderous, drowned the room. "Enough!" He turned toward Johann, his gaze burning with disappointment too heavy for words. "You shame us again. You will go to the ancestral hall. Reflect on your sins in the presence of our forefathers." The words struck Johann like chains snapping shut. Guards seized his arms. The eyes of his family, mocking, pitying, condemning, stabbed into him as he was dragged away. The ancestral hall was a cavern of shadows. Tall wooden tablets, carved with the names of dead emperors and magnates, loomed above like silent judges. Dust hung thick, stirred only by Johann's unsteady breath. Tanya's small footsteps echoed as she entered. She carried no lamp, but her presence seemed to bring light anyway. She knelt beside him, her voice low and steady. "Father, tell me the truth. Don't hide it from me." For a long time, Johann said nothing. His fists trembled, knuckles whitening. His throat worked, but no words came. Then, slowly, like floodgates breaking, his voice spilled out, ragged and heavy with years of unshed bitterness. 9 years ago, it happened before. He stopped, swallowing hard, as if the words themselves burned. "It was Chandra." His tone darkened, jagged with venom. "He wanted me gone. I was in his way. So one night, he drugged me. I woke in a hotel room. No memory, just shame. Days later, a woman appeared. Reporters came like vultures. The headlines screamed, 'The eldest son a disgrace.' My own father," his voice broke, tears spilling despite his effort to hold them. "My own father believed it. He cast me out." Silence stretched. Only the creak of old beams above, the faint rustle of incense ash shifting in the still air. I tried to drink it away, to gamble it away, to drive it away, but nothing worked. Every night I saw their eyes, the cameras, the headlines, my father's cold face. And now it happens again, as if my life is cursed. Tanya placed her small hand over his. Her eyes, though young, carried a depth that steadied him. "You are not cursed, Father. You were betrayed." Unseen in the shadows behind the carved screen, another listener stood still as stone. Yoga. He had followed unseen, his heart heavy with suspicion. Now each word he heard was a dagger. 9 years. 9 years I turned my back on him. 9 years I favored the serpent over my own blood. Guilt, sharp, suffocating, pressed down on him. He remembered Johann as a boy, laughing freely, eager to please, fearless in mischief. He remembered the day he called him a disgrace, the day that laughter died. How blind I was, how unforgivable. Hours later, a quiet knock at the study door. Yoga's most trusted aide entered, carrying a thick folder. His face was grave. "Sir, the investigation is complete." Yoga opened the folder with trembling hands. Paper whispered like dry leaves. He read. Each page was a nail hammered into betrayal. Phone records, Chandra's voice whispering poison to the pregnant woman. bank transfers, sums large enough to buy loyalty and silence. A reporter's testimony, signed in ink, admitting he was paid to slander Johann both then and now. Yoga's vision blurred with rage. His cane shook against the floor. The serpent had not only lied, he had stolen nearly a decade of a son's life. That night, under the cold moon, the courtyard became a stage for reckoning. Chandra was dragged out, bound, his protests shrill and hollow. The whip cracked, once, twice, 10 times. Each lash tore through silk, then skin, until his voice dissolved into hoarse screams. The watching servants trembled, but dared not look away. Yoga's voice thundered over the cries. You framed your brother, stained this family's name, betrayed my trust. From this night forward, you are nothing. The punishment echoed through the mansion like thunder rolling across mountains. Days later, Chandra and his wife tried to claw their way back to favor. They sent gifts to Tanya, jade bracelets, embroidered silks, gold hairpins heavy enough to bend her head. But when the last box was opened, she looked at them with eyes cold as winter rivers. My loyalty is not bought, she said, her voice steady, carrying across the hall. I already have a father. His name is Johann. The rejection cut deeper than any whip, and in that moment, the balance of the Jiang family shifted forever.
The days that followed Chandra's disgrace were not peaceful. The Jiang household buzzed with rumors, whispers that traveled faster than fire across dry grass. Servants spoke in corners, elders argued behind closed doors, and everywhere Tanya walked, she felt eyes on her, curious, calculating, envious. But she had no time to fear. She was already weaving the next step of her plan. At night, the great halls of Johann's villa echoed with a strange new sound. Silence, broken by questions. Father, Tanya would ask in her gentle, deliberate way, tilting her head as if puzzled. How do you tell jadeite from nephrite? Their color can be the same, but which one sings clearer under a hammer strike? Or, Father, the elders mentioned something called the bullwhip effect in supply chains. Does it mean demand whips suppliers like a lash, or is it something else? Johann would blink, caught between pride and panic. His heart warmed each time she called him father, but dread followed quickly because he didn't know the answers. He had spent 9 years drowning in whiskey, not in books. When Tanya's questioning eyes grew too wide, he would retreat to his study. And in the silence of midnight, he picked up the phone. Father, he would mutter, his voice low, ashamed. What's the difference between jadeite and nephrite again? And what's the bullwhip effect? Say it slowly so I can write it down. On the other end of the line, the patriarch, Yoga, smiled in secret pride. It was not just Tanya who was learning. His eldest son was slowly relearning the language of power. And every night, Johann returned to Tanya with answers, pretending casual wisdom, while she listened with shining eyes and whispered, Father, you're amazing. And in those words,
Johann began to believe he truly could be. It was not long before Yoga raised the stakes. Summoning both sons before the family council, his voice rang like iron on stone. The Jiang legacy cannot be held by the weak, so you will be tested. Each of you must create a crown worthy of our ancestors, an echo of the legendary Snowy Lily of the Valley crown, worn by Princess Lydia of the Daifang dynasty. This is not a matter of gold and jewels. It is a matter of spirit. The one whose crown embodies true power will be heir and the rightful guardian of Tanya. The words fell heavy as chains. This was no mere contest of craft. It was succession itself. Kondra's lips curled into a cruel smile. He had the finest jewelers at his command, an obedient daughter to model his work, and decades of scheming ambition. He would crush Johann like a beetle. But Tanya's hand slipped into Johann's, small but steady. "We'll win," she whispered, with such conviction that for the first time in years, Johann's heart did not tremble. They began their work not in glittering showrooms, but in a forgotten workshop tucked behind the National Museum. The air was thick with the smell of oil, dust, and ancient paper. Here, Johann's estranged sister, Jihan, spread scrolls and diagrams across a scarred wooden table. "These are sketches from the royal archives," she explained. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent her life buried in history. The snowy lily crown wasn't just ornament. It was a symbol of harmony between ruler and heir. If you recreate the metal without recreating the spirit, you will fail. Johann stared at the parchment. Lines swirled into impossible patterns, lily petals wrought in silver, delicate yet unbreakable. His chest tightened. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice rough with doubt. Jihan's hand rested on his shoulder, firm, grounding. "Brother, you can. You've only forgotten. But she nodded at Tanya, who sat silently tracing the drawings with reverent fingers. "She remembers for you." And so the night stretched on. Metal clinked, files rasped, hammers rang. Tanya sat at her father's side, sometimes offering suggestions, sometimes only watching, her quiet faith alight in the dim workshop. Slowly, Johann's hand steadied, his eyes sharpened. Each blow of his hammer was a prayer, each cut of the chisel a defiance against the years stolen from him. At last, the appointed day arrived. The great ballroom of the Jiang estate gleamed like a palace. Chandeliers blazed overhead, scattering light across velvet drapes and polished marble. The elite of Beijing gathered, their laughter sharp, their curiosity sharper. Everyone knew what was at stake. Whispers floated like smoke. "Johann? Compete with Kondra? He'll show up drunk. Or not at all. Let's see which clown crown he brings this time." Then the patriarch raised a hand, and silence fell. "Begin." First came Kondra. His daughter, Yuna, entered with measured grace, her silken gown flowing like water. Upon her brow rested the crown his artisans wrought, white jade lilies, gold filigree twisting into flawless symmetry. It sparkled coldly, perfect in craft, devoid of soul. gasps rippled through the crowd. "Exquisite," someone whispered. Another murmured, "Fit for an empress." Yuna lifted her guzheng and began to play Holy Clouds and Clear Sound. Her fingers danced skillfully, each note precise, practiced, rehearsed. The audience applauded politely as her final chord faded. Kondra's smile was smug, certain of victory. Then came Johann. The crowd tittered at first, waiting for the inevitable disaster, the shirt with garish flowers, the stench of drink. But what entered was a man transformed. Johann walked slowly, deliberately, his suit black and immaculate, his posture straight, and beside him was Tanya, her hair swept up, her gown pale as moonlight. Upon her head gleamed the crown they had forged together, lilies wrought in silver, so fine they seemed to breathe, inlaid with jade so pure it glowed like morning dew. The room went silent. Johann's gaze swept across them all, no longer ashamed. His hand rested lightly on the guzheng beside her. And when she sat, he sat beside her. Tanya's fingers struck the first note. The sound was liquid, shimmering, as though a river had been plucked into being. Then, unexpectedly, Johann raised a flute to his lips. The first notes wavered, unsure, but then steadied, warm and rich, weaving around the guzheng's melody like vines curling around a tree. Father and daughter, instrument and instrument, voice and voice. The music grew. Listeners closed their eyes and saw visions, a princess beneath snow-laden blossoms, an emperor standing proud beside her, harmony between generations. The guzheng song was the river, the flute the wind upon its surface. Together they recreated the legend of Princess Lydia and her father, the very spirit of the crown. Gasps turned to tears, even the cynical wiped their eyes. Some swore the chandelier crystals trembled with the resonance. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was absolute, until it shattered into thunderous applause. Yoga stood, his hands trembling slightly on his cane. His voice was thick with emotion. I have seen many crowns, he declared. Crowns of gold, crowns of jade, crowns heavy with jewels, but empty of meaning. But tonight I have seen a crown not of metal, but of spirit. I have seen a father and daughter reborn, and for that, his voice rose, echoing across the chamber, I name Johann the new CEO of the Zhang Group. The hall erupted in astonishment. Johann's knees buckled, but Tanya's hand tightened on his. Tears blurred his vision as he bowed to the patriarch. Around them the crowd roared, but in Johann's ears only his daughter's voice remained. See, father, she whispered, her words like sunlight breaking through storm. I told you we would win. And in that moment, Johann knew he had. Not just the competition, not just the title, but himself. Restored, remade, reborn. The night air outside the Zhang estate was still. Yet inside the mansion, the atmosphere was a storm. Yuna's scream shattered the delicate quiet of the hall. It was not the poised, gentle voice the family knew, but a raw and trembling cry. She stood in the corridor, her body shaking, her face pale as paper. In her hand gleamed the blade of a fruit knife, trembling like her breath. Her eyes were wide, broken, and bloodshot. "It's all because of you," she shrieked, her words splintered with sobs. "If you never appeared, I would still be loved. I would still belong. But now I am nothing." Before anyone could move, she lunged. The world slowed to a heartbeat. The shuffle of silk robes, the sharp gasp of startled servants, the thud of hurried footsteps. Then the piercing pain, a soundless gasp. Tanya's cry cut through the silence as the blade found its mark. Blood blossomed against her clothes like a cruel red flower. For a moment, Johann froze. He had faced ridicule, exile, and humiliation for nearly a decade, but nothing had ever felt as unbearable as the sight of his daughter crumpling to the ground, blood staining her pale dress. Something inside him broke. He caught her in his arms, his hands desperate, pressing against the wound, trembling. "Tanya, no, stay with me. Stay awake," his voice cracked, raw with terror. Tanya, breath shallow, forced her eyes open, her voice barely a whisper. "Father, don't be afraid. I chose you because I knew you would protect me." Her words seared through him like fire. In that instant, Johann shed the last remnants of the decadent playboy he had once been. The bars, the cars, the hollow laughter, all of it vanished like smoke. What remained was a man with steel in his spine and fire in his blood. A father. The very next morning, Johann strode into the Jean Group's boardroom. Gone was the man mocked as a fool. The doors opened, and he entered with a stillness more dangerous than rage. His footsteps echoed against the polished floor, steady and cold. He carried a leather case under one arm. The elders of the family sat waiting, whispering nervously. Chandra was already seated at the far end, his face arranged into a mask of smug defiance. But when Johann placed the case on the table, silence descended like a heavy curtain. He opened it. One by one, he laid out the documents within. "This," he said, "is proof of Chandra's embezzlement. Years of stolen funds. Here, the records of his shell companies. And here," he paused, his eyes like knives, "his written confessions to orchestrating not one, but 2 plots against me. The scandals 9 years ago, and the most recent one." Each page fell onto the table like the toll of a bell. The elders shifted in their seats. Some gasped, others whispered prayers. The weight of truth was undeniable. Johann straightened, his eyes sweeping the room. He did not shout, he did not plead. His voice was steady, carved from stone. "I have endured disgrace, I have endured exile, but I will not endure this family's corruption any longer. From this moment forward, Chandra is finished." Chandra's composure cracked. He stood, sputtering denials, only to be silenced when security guards entered on Yoga's command. His face drained of color as he was dragged away, his desperate cries echoing down the corridor. His wife followed, weeping, clinging, until she too was expelled. And Yuna, pale and broken, vanished into the night, no longer a Zhang. The boardroom was left in silence, and in that silence, Johann's authority was sealed. Days later, the antiseptic scent of the hospital clung to the air. The walls were white, the corridors hushed. Tanya lay in her bed, pale but alive, the bandages across her side stark against her skin. Beside her, Johann kept vigil, exhaustion in his eyes, his hand never leaving hers. "Father," she whispered one morning, her voice thin but steady, "look at this." From under her pillow, she pulled out an envelope. With trembling fingers, she handed it to him. Inside was a folded document, a DNA test. He frowned, confused, and scanned the lines. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. A 99.9% match. His breath hitched. His eyes darted to Tanya's face, searching, disbelieving. When Yuna said, "I wasn't Kandra's daughter," something inside me knew it. And then I noticed it, the mole, the same plum blossom mark you have, on the wrist. I had to know. Her voice grew even quieter, but each word was a hammer to his heart. "I am not the daughter you chose, Father. I am the daughter you lost." The truth fell on Johann like thunder. 9 years ago, when Kandra destroyed him with lies, he hadn't just stripped him of his honor. He had stolen his child, hidden her away in some forgotten village, and for years Johann had drowned himself in wine and regret, never knowing that his real daughter lived, waiting, suffering, surviving. Tears filled his eyes, hot and unstoppable. His hands shook as he reached for her, holding her as though he could shield her from every cruelty that had ever touched her. "My child, my daughter, my blood," he broke, rough with a grief too deep for words. "All these years I thought fate had taken everything from me, but fate has given you back." Tanya pressed her face into his chest, her own tears soaking his shirt. "I knew it," she whispered. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you would save me." And in that quiet, sterile hospital room, a broken father and a wounded daughter found the truth neither had dared to dream of, that they were not strangers bound by choice, but family bound by destiny. For the first time in years, Johann lifted his head, his tears still shining, but behind them a fire burned. The portraits of his ancestors, the shadows of betrayal, the scars of humiliation, none of it mattered now. He was no longer the fallen heir. He was no longer the playboy prince. He was a father. And with his daughter by his side, he would build an empire, not on greed, but on love, unbreakable.